What's up, fellow forced shut-ins? Welcome to another History and Coffee. Now, the astute among you may notice that I am slowly morphing into Thomas Sullivan Magnum III from the mid '80s hit TV show Magnum PI, and I assure you that that is a natural coping mechanism that I have developed to handle stress. So I wouldn't worry about it. So I wanted to continue my series on subculture history and talk about punk rock. I don't know if you saw my skinhead video. If you did, I'm sorry. Really, any of these videos, they're very bad. But anyway, um, so a lot of people think that punk rock started in the '70s with bands like the Sex Pistols and the Ramones and a couple others, and those people are fucking wrong and dumb. It actually started back in the early '60s, and it was the result of, again, pop culture sucking. Um, so you have this period in world history, not just America, that was extremely fucking turbulent. There was all kinds of economic problems and social reforms and just upheaval all over the place. And your average pop song or rock song is like this cheesy fucking garbage, long-haired shit. And you have these teenagers coming up that are like, one of these things is not like the other. So they started forming back then what were called garage bands, and the idea was, talk about real shit, be political, and then be fast and fucking loud, and just sort of scream your head off. And a good example is the MC5. You ever check them out? Most people know them. And that's sort of where you got your basis of punk rock. Now, the term didn't come around, of course, until the '70s. It was a media invention that, then got run with. But again, this is one of those things that splits off into two categories. You have sort of the music genre side of it, which of course is your three chords: fast, loud, angry, political, not political, whatever, just cheap, loud music. And then your philosophical, which is the idea of not being not music not being a product, but either a way to blow off steam or sort of a vehicle for your ideas and or whatever you're pissed about, whatever, and just sort of doing that all on your own. And that was what was cool about these garage bands. Now, back in the '60s, is they didn't, music was prepackaged. It was like, okay, you got this guy and that guy, and we're going to decide what they wear. And there's a team of people, just like today, there's a team of people writing the lyrics, and it's just based on what we get from focus groups and based on what sells. And these garage bands would sort of, they'd write what they want to write, sound what they want to sound like, dress like what they want to dress like, and they would pay out of pocket for all their own shit. So they would produce their own albums and sell them themselves, distribute them themselves. They would, go around, find gigs. There was no like real, management or anything like that. It was all sort of, up to the individual. And that's something, a lot of people talk about punk rock sort of dying off in the '90s when it went mainstream, but that's kind of happened all over the place. I mean, it went mainstream in the '80s, it went mainstream in the '70s. It's, I could see the genre, or like what you think of when you see like a punk rocker, kid with a mohawk or whatever. They're still around, but that's not really a thing anymore so much. I'm sure people are going to get pissed about this in the comments and be like, "Oh, you fucking old man saying punk is dead." Well, it is. The philosophy, however, lives on in independent artists, and that's completely removed from genre. I don't give a fuck if it's like folk or hip hop or whatever. If you have a vision for your art, music or whatever, and you go out there and you say, I'm going to make this exact thing and talk about exactly what I want, and I'm going to do it on my own terms. That, in my opinion, is punk rock in philosophy. And, I mean, again, that's just my opinion. I did sort of grow up in the New York punk scene. I definitely had a mohawk and all that shit, and based off my experience, I think that kind of shit is a little bit more punk rock than using your parents' money to buy yourself a pair of Dr. Martens and going and hanging out in front of CBGB's, drinking beer and doing cocaine. But what do I know? Anyway, so you get to the 1970s. Again, the first time punk went mainstream. Ramones, Sex Pistols. Originally, the Sex Pistols were cooked up as an advertising scheme for a local chain of sex shops, which is why they wore all that bondage gear, which then ended up becoming a hallmark of the sort of punk genre scene stuff. The Ramones were a little different. They just they wanted to be a rock band. I don't think that originally punk rock was necessarily something that they were striving for. I think that they were just a couple of guys that might not have necessarily been the most talented and happened to be at the right place at the right time. And they got that sort of punk hook and, went off into legend. And this continued to evolve in the 80s, becoming less sort of, originally the political side of punk, especially the mainstream stuff, was more sort of cartoonish. And then when you get into the 1980s, it gets a little bit more serious. Bands like The Exploited, the Subhumans, especially the Subhumans, really brought sort of real anarchy into the movement. And that's another thing that's cool about even just the genre of punk is it sort of every decade brings its own flavor. Now, of course, the stuff that's around now is purely and seriously political, which I don't necessarily like either. I kind of think that's another nail in the punk being dead coffin, because I think that it should always retain a measure of that cartoonishness, because again, like any of these other subcultures, the real center of it is kids getting together and having fun on the weekends. If you want to go march and protest, go join a fucking extremist group or something like that. Leave the fucking little suburban kids alone. So that is a very convoluted and confusing, as are most of my videos, explanation of sort of the history of punk rock and sort of the philosophy of it. So I hope you enjoyed. And update on that history project. I'm still working on that. Still coming up with primary source material for it. I'm thinking of calling it Humans of History, but I haven't decided yet. I'll make a video whenever I release it, hopefully sometime this month. Thanks.